In July 1947, Roswell was a small, sleepy town surrounded by ranches and desert. It was also home to the 509th Bomb Squadron, which was the most elite military group in the world. They had just dropped 2 bombs on Japan and tested a couple more in the Pacific. America had won the war, and just when it seemed like life was getting back to normal, a strange thing happened. Something large and silver hurtled out of the sky and ploughed into the desert with a bang. A local rancher found the pieces of well, whatever it was, and reported it to the local airbase. The government took immediate interest, and for the first and only time in US history, issued a press release stating the crash of a flying disc. Naturally, this big made headlines across the country.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947, that a flying disc has been found. The biggest Who's It, What's It story of the year, flying saucer.
But one day later, the initial press release was retracted, and a new one issued with a more down-to-earth explanation. And those 2 press releases are where the story gets so much of its juice. One day, it's War of the Worlds, and the next day, it's a weather balloon. So, the townspeople of Roswell went back to their farming, and life went on. But of course, that was not the end of the story, and some people could not leave it alone. We would never have heard of Roswell, nor would it have appeared on our TV screens for that matter, if it wasn't for the chance meeting in 1978 of 2 men, Jesse Marcel, a retired military officer, and Stanton Friedman. By day, a mild-mannered physicist, but by night, the world's most famous ufologist.
I'm convinced after 30 years of investigation that the government recovered a crashed flying saucer and alien bodies here in New Mexico. It's one of the biggest stories of the millennium.
Hold on, that's quite a statement. We're going to need a little more information. Let's just back up for a second. In 1947, Jesse Marcel was the intelligence officer at the Roswell Air Base. And when news of the flying disc hit town, it was Marcel's job to investigate. Before he died, he told Friedman his story. The seed was planted, and the Roswell conspiracy was born.
I first talked to Jesse in '78. This is before any books were out. It was before there was a big public noise of any kind. The people in ufology didn't know about Roswell. It was de nouveau. I mean, it was there, but nobody knew about it.
I found one piece of metal, what looked like metal anyway. It was not flexible, but it was as thin as a foil of a pack of cigarettes. I tried to make a dent in this metal. He says, you can't bend it. You can't make a mark on it. He says, I took a sledgehammer and whammed it. I put it on the ground and whammed it. The sledgehammer bounced off of it. It was definitely not a weather balloon. And it was an aircraft. So what it could have been, I wouldn't know.
There was no reason for anybody to lie under those circumstances. Forgetting about the fact that if you're suggesting the intelligence officer for the most elite military group in the world is going to make up a crazy story like this, it doesn't make any sense.
Friedman was hooked, and he started digging around Roswell to see if anyone else had a story to tell. Many of the witnesses he first talked to have since died. Luckily, these interviews were recorded long before the hype.
I don't know what it was. It was something like balsa wood, but it wouldn't burn, and I couldn't cut it with my knife.
was a little piece of material. And you could crumple it up, let it out, and it would come out flat. And you could not crease it.
So, Roswell was turning out to be rather interesting. Something strange had happened. The question is what and why Roswell? It seems that aliens can't resist the combination of nuclear weapons, giant rockets, and radar.
Do you recognize them? They are the great inventions of the 20th century. You think you've seen them all before, but science and technology keep upgrading them. A new Discovery Science series will guide you through the most innovative laboratories where the greatest European experts work relentlessly on their development. Science inventing the future. Mega World, Monday at 9 on Discovery Science.
Something strange happened in Roswell. That much we do know. We also know that none of us would ever have heard of it if Stanton Friedman hadn't met Jesse Marcel. Marcel told Friedman about a crashed saucer in Roswell. Friedman started developing a theory.
At the end of World War II, there were 3 signs to any visiting smart alien that soon these idiot Earthlings, this primitive society whose major activity was obviously tribal warfare, would be bothering them. The 3 signs were nuclear weapons, V-2 rockets, and powerful radar. Isn't it amazing that the only place on the entire planet in July 1947 where you could study all 3 of these technologies was southeastern New Mexico?
Somewhere along the way, Friedman developed the ability to know what aliens are thinking. But if there was a flying saucer at Roswell, it didn't land, it crashed. For all we know, it could have been on its way to, say, Mercury. Wherever it was headed, it didn't quite make it, so we are left with a mystery. There's only one person still alive who claims to have actually had his hands on a piece of the crashed saucer. And he's not your average conspiracy theorist. He's a flight surgeon with the US military.
You can rule out all the other explanations, so what's left? An extraterrestrial craft. That may be the most outlandish thing, but it is also the simplest explanation.
Luckily for us, before returning to Hangar 84 with pieces of the crashed disc, Jesse Marcel stopped at home to show his wife and his son, Jesse Marcel Jr.
That July night in Roswell, the one I'll never forget because of the uniqueness of it, marked a dividing point in my life before the event and after the event. I was sound asleep. It was, 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. And my dad came into the bedroom and he woke me up and says, "Come here, Jesse, I got something I want you to see." He was very excited, and my dad wasn't given to excitement, so this is kind of unusual for him. So I knew that, well, whatever it was must be pretty important. He went over and called my mother and got her up, and he had pre-positioned some debris on the floor of the kitchen. Then he said, "This is flying saucer material." Then there were some looked like I-beam fragments, and on the inner surface there was I thought hieroglyphic writing. I said, "What is this?"
Marcel and his father had this piece of the debris recreated from memory so that they could show the world what they saw that night.
On the inner surface of this little beam, you have the symbols. And the one that I recall as being most accurate is the one on the end, because I could tie it in with familiar objects such as a seal balancing a ball on its nose. The meaning of these symbols escapes my feeble mind there. Maybe it says, "Do not flush in zero gravity," or something like that. And we looked at this for 10 or 15 minutes, and he's telling me, "Remember this as something that you will remember the rest of your life." And by golly, here we are almost 60 years later, it's still there.
Like his father, Jesse Jr. joined the military. He's been serving as a flight surgeon for 40 years. With only 2 weeks leave this year, he has chosen to come to Roswell and retrace his father's steps. It was here, to Hangar 84, that his father brought the debris. And the way Jesse tells it, that debris was quickly switched by the military to throw reporters off the scent.
I have seen photographs of my father kneeling with some debris in General Ramey's office floor. General DuBose is there too. And looking at the material on the floor of his office, I thought, hey, wait, that's not what we saw in Roswell on our kitchen floor. My dad did say that there might have been some original debris in there, but he said for the most part they switched it.
There's no doubt in your mind, I gather, that the balloon story was a cover story.
Absolutely none. We knew that it was a cover story, but we used that in order to assuage the curiosity of the press.
Let's assume for a moment that a UFO did crash in Roswell. Why would the government want to cover it up? It's 2 years after World War II. Global tensions are high and the Cold War is heating up. It might not have been the best time to admit you don't have control over your own skies.
It would have been very surprising if they hadn't covered up. What are you going to say? Aliens are visiting? We don't know what they want, where they're from, or how they operate? We thought you'd like to know?
Hold on a minute. The question now begging is, why did the government tell us it was a flying disc in the first place? There are two possibilities. One, someone low on the command chain got excited and made a simple mistake. But military protocol dictated that a commander of the 509th had to authorise a press release. So a simple mistake seems unlikely. Two, it was planned disinformation. The theory goes like this. Admit it's a UFO, then offer a more plausible explanation like a weather balloon. Chances are you're a lot more likely to believe it's a weather balloon than an interstellar spaceship. Of course, it's not as easy to do as it sounds.
In the first place, there were people in town who did know something. The second place, putting out a press story that could later be yanked was a wonderful way to do things. People bought the cover-up.
By digging around Roswell, Stan had unearthed a real peach of a story.
So nice to meet you.
And like bees to honey, ufologists from everywhere came swarming to Roswell. And everyone had an opinion. Dave Thomas is a physicist and mathematician. He's also the president of a group called New Mexicans for Science and Reason.
In science, we say that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And if you want somebody to believe something as extraordinary as aliens traveling across the depths of space and actually coming to Earth, you have to have something better than fuzzy pictures. You're going to need real physical evidence. The best of all would be a drop of alien blood. This would be bigger than Charles Darwin. There's no way that you could quench the scientific enthusiasm for that story. But the reason it hasn't happened is we have not been visited by aliens yet. Maybe we will someday, but it hasn't happened yet.
Then how do you explain this? There are those who believe that what came down at Roswell was more than just a disc. Tom Carey and Don Schmidt are seasoned UFO investigators. They have dedicated over 20 years to this story, and they are convinced that they have uncovered the truth.
What crashed at Roswell was not of this Earth. This has been confirmed to us by scores of witnesses who witnessed the craft and its deceased occupants.
Real dead aliens? Now we're talking.
There were up to 5, 6, 7 bodies found at 3 locations, we believe. It wasn't until just a few years ago that we found out that Mac Brazel, who found the original wreckage, also found bodies at a site just a few miles from the debris field.
And how do they know this? Tom and Don talked to witnesses and their daughters and brothers and grandchildren, all of whom described bizarrely similar things.
I think by the very consistency of the eyewitness testimony, we were dealing with something, as one of the retired officers once stated, well, they sure weren't from Texas.
They were small, they had large heads for their size.
They had very large heads that were shaped larger on the top, and they kind of tapered down.
The heads were very much larger than the body. That was out of proportion for the size of the body they had. The eyes were very deeply set back and set in. The amazing thing about the skulls that they were kind of flexible, that it wasn't, like a hard skull.
And Granddaddy said their heads were large, and the little suit that they had on was just, you couldn't, it was just like silk or something.
And humanoid looking, humanesque looking, but not like us.
You have to admit, that is rather strange. Why exactly would all these separate individuals make up the same story?
As unlikely as it might seem to some people, although to me the notion of bodies makes perfectly good sense. It's got to be a crew on the darn craft, because why did it crash? Probably somebody made a mistake. That's crews, beings, thinking individuals.
So imagine you have actually seen an alien life form. Why wait for 30 years to talk about it? It seems like a pretty big story to just sit on. Unless, of course, you were threatened.
He said, you did not see anything, there was no crash here. And I said, hey, look, mister, I said, I'm a civilian and you can't do a damn thing to me. And he said, oh, yes, we can, mister. He said, somebody would be picking your bones out of the sand.
The military police came and told George and I that if we ever told anything about this incident, talked about it in any way, that not only we would be killed, but the family.
One of the few times I remember my dad being serious was when he came in and he informed my mother that, hey, this didn't happen. Didn't happen at all. So don't talk to your friends about this or anybody else as far as that goes.
There are problems with witness testimony. Maybe they want to believe so badly that they don't realize they're stretching the truth. For Roswell in particular, a huge problem is the 40 or 50 years that have elapsed. You don't even find it in UFO books from the 60s. And then all of a sudden, like a phoenix from the ashes, Roswell evolves into this huge expanding mythology. And one of the signs that it is just an expanding mythology is the divergence of stories. Instead of the stories converging on what really happened, stories are diverging. Instead of one crash site, we have 6 different crash sites. You take your pick. Which UFO author do you like? You pick his crash site.
And here's just one of those crash site theories. Don and Tom will now illustrate their findings using this giant chalkboard.
It is our contention that 20 miles southeast of Corona, there was an explosion raining debris down on this particular location. Along the trajectory line of the object, a number of bodies would descend at this site 2 to 2.5 miles to the southeast.
That's site number 2.
Along the same trajectory line, the remains of a capsule or even escape pod would then continue on 15 to 17 miles before impacting at this site 40 miles northwest of Roswell.
We have not yet found this site. We are still searching for this site.
As far as I'm concerned, there were 2 crashes. I think some of the people who wanted a share of the glory, if you will, of Roswell to shine down on them have stressed other locations, and those continue to be stressed even long after the data shows that those didn't exist.
It's a career builder for many people. Books, movies. See, I can't get $1,000 for my lecture. Flying saucers are not real. People just don't want to spend $1,000 to hear that.
If you'll open it up, I'll sign it. That means you got to buy it. $14.95. I wasn't kidding. 168 minutes.
I'm sitting there with Shatner. He elbows me with Don. We're sold out. Great show tonight.
$9.95.
So now the Roswell story has spawned its own entire industry. All this investigation has stirred up a dust storm of controversy, and the 1980s are spent arguing. Bodies, no bodies, discs, balloons, 2 crash sites, 3 crash sites. It's all very exhausting.
Anybody else want a book while I'm signing?
But then something really surprising happened. By the early 1990s, the governor of New Mexico is so overwhelmed with calls that he demands from the Air Force some sort of explanation for Roswell. And guess what? The government actually responded. Fact versus fiction in the New Mexico desert is not exactly light reading. After spending thousands of dollars and employing 30 governmental agencies over 2 years, the Air Force produced a 975-page report claiming that what really crashed at Roswell was a top-secret project called Mogul. What is Mogul? Well, it's a balloon.
To call them weather balloons is a terrible injustice. These were not simple weather balloons. They were 600-foot tall, gigantic physics experiments that had about 24 weather balloons for the lift. And they had parachutes and rings and ropes and strings, and one of the main features was the curious radar reflectors that were made of shiny metallic paper, didn't crumple very easily. They didn't switch the debris. What's in the pictures is what you get. That's the Roswell incident.
Could it really be that simple? Could the government just be telling the truth? Then why does it take another 300-page report from the US government to explain these symbols?
When the going gets tough, the human body gets going. Get the inside story on how we are built to last. Human Body, the Ultimate Machine. Sunday at 8:10 on Discovery Science. Life is a journey. It has its ups and downs. You just have to dive in and embrace it. This autumn, go on a journey and see the world as you've never seen it before. Uncover, reveal, inspire, explore. Discovery World.
Something crashed outside the town of Roswell, New Mexico. The US military says it was a weather balloon called Mogul and released the Roswell report. At 900 pages, it seems like an awful lot of effort to prove something so straightforward. Some would say it's rather fishy.
Project Mogul is a red herring, frankly. Everything about it is wrong. The characteristics of the material as described by the witnesses out in the field don't match. Mogul, you have foil kind of stuff that any 3-year-old can tear. Balsa wood sticks that any 4-year-old could break. And yet the witnesses say that the I-beam-shaped pieces couldn't be broken, couldn't be burned. Not the same thing. Another thing about Mogul, supposedly super secret, extraordinarily secret. There was nothing secret in the technology of the balloon, the radio sonde, you know, all the junk that went with it. The only thing that was secret was the purpose.
On page 302, the Air Force also came up with an explanation for Jesse Marcel's mysterious symbols. They claimed it was Scotch tape with flowers on it, donated from a toy company.
The only witness that I could really vouch for is Charlie Moore, my physics professor, who launched the things. And he is, you know, a highly respected physicist, and he saw firsthand these radar reflectors with the funny alien-looking symbols, and he must have seen 100 of those and wondered, I wonder why these toy manufacturing people are putting these funny symbols on our radar reflectors. There goes another.
I've seen some of the tape, and it's much wider, much bigger than these, and it does show flowers and not this kind of symbols. So I can compare with what they look like, but it was not what we saw, period.
So now that's all cleared up. Remember this?
The best of all would be a drop of alien blood. Alien blood.
How about not just alien blood, but an alien head, alien legs, in fact, an entire alien? Careful what you ask for. You might just get it. The infamous alien autopsy footage.
And this is where it all began. Behind me are markers indicating the supposed crash site of a UFO spaceship and 3 alien bodies found in 1947.
It is now the mid-1990s. The Roswell story had escalated, and the Air Force report had stoked the fires of conspiracy. There's so much buzz about Roswell that America had gone alien crazy. The X-Files, Outer Limits, and Star Trek were the top TV shows. Independence Day and Mars Attacks were in the movie theatres.
I didn't know if it was, and some little creature was going to come out and get us, or, you know.
People are being abducted. We're being visited by extraterrestrials, and it's time for people to awaken spiritually.
Then something else emerged, and with suspiciously perfect timing. It was one of the most controversial pieces of film ever to hit TV screens. It's claimed that this is a real alien autopsy, and that the critter being cut up was recovered from the crash site at Roswell. An Englishman named Ray Santilli claimed he discovered this allegedly authentic, shocking footage from a military cameraman in Florida. Recognizing its shock value, Ray was looking for a buyer. Enter Bob Kiviat, a long-time Los Angeles producer of paranormal programming.
When I started communicating with Ray Santilli's offices in England, it was very obvious that Ray had waited and hoped that someone like me, with network TV experience with UFOs and aliens, would contact him. As far as I was concerned, if he was claiming he had secured footage of the Roswell event, autopsies of the creature, it sounded so too good to be true.
More than a little intrigued, Bob Kiviat boarded a plane to England to see if this footage was worth all the hype.
Ray Santilli took out a tape, he popped it into a machine, and my mouth dropped open. Looked like a little female alien that was pregnant, because right away my mind's going wild with ideas about what this might be. Looked like a science fiction movie, literally. Then the scene unfolds, and the rest is history. I watched the entire autopsy of this creature, pretty much, that the public has since come to know as the alien autopsy, and with my mouth hanging open, I'm sure. I can't believe I even said a word. Maybe I said unbelievable. Maybe I said incredible. It looked potentially authentic. And that all came in my mind as I'm watching it. This will be almost impossible to not show the American public. That's what I felt.
Many things have been said about the authenticity of this autopsy footage, but how do we find the truth? First, let's look at the room. This was supposedly a small medical room in Texas. There's nothing that indicates that isn't true. The clock on the wall is a General Electric model, and they did make these in 1947. The telephone is a standard issue Bell telephone, also authentic to 1947. The tools? Correct. The table? Correct. So, okay, the room looks right. What about the doctors? Well, firstly, autopsies aren't normally done in contamination suits, but of course, if it is a creature from outer space, it's perhaps better safe than sorry. Although it's also very convenient that everyone's face is covered, including the person behind the glass. Those alien germs must be very, very strong. Now let's look at the procedure itself. One of the first things you learn in med school is how to hold a pair of scissors. Always support the blades with your index fingers. You would never hold scissors like a tailor, which is exactly how this alleged pathologist is holding them. The qualities of the skin are strange too. Usually skin retracts from a blade. It doesn't here. Reacts more like, let's say, rubber than skin. But there is a bigger question. We on this planet have all evolved from a single-celled organism. And on Earth, we range from looking like this, to this, to this. What is the likelihood that aliens evolved with 2 eyes, 1 nose, a mouth, 4 limbs, not to mention genitalia kept in the same place as ours?
This is extraordinary, or so well faked that if it's faked by a master.
But what master? Was it Ray Santilli? Was it a crack special effects team? Or the mystery cameraman? We may never know, because when Bob Kiviat bought the footage from Ray, there was one important catch. The cameraman had to remain anonymous.
He will never be contacted again. I can't interview him. There's no guarantee I'll ever meet him as part of the documentary for Fox. And the kicker was the motive the cameraman had for selling the footage at all was to pay for his daughter's wedding.
And so it seemed everyone got what they wanted. Fox aired the show, and 30 million people sat glued to their screens. To date, it has not been proved whether the footage is real, but anyone who previously didn't know anything about Roswell could now join in the argument.
Look at the UFOs. You missed them. They're already gone.
The Roswell legend was growing. The debate around the alien autopsy only added fuel to the fire. America is now obsessed with aliens. With all this talk about little green men, you would think the Air Force wouldn't touch Roswell with a 10-foot pole. They explained it already. It was a Mogul balloon. Right? In 1997, the Air Force came out with another 300-page report. This one was called The Roswell Report, Case Closed. Case Closed claimed to explain the sightings of alien bodies by witnesses. Another simple explanation: crash test dummies. Nick Redfern is a UFO investigator and author of 7 books on the paranormal. When the crash test dummy theory came out, he immediately formed an opinion.
Roswell continues to defy explanation, and I think because of that, the mystery continues. And, you know, people say, well, maybe a UFO crashed, maybe it was a Mogul balloon, maybe they're crash test dummies. But then, you know, people legitimately ask, well, is it possible it really was all a mistake for a weather balloon? Personally, I don't buy that theory, and I find it very suspicious that the government has come out with these various different theories.
Why on earth was the Air Force dropping crash test dummies into the desert? To test things like ejection seats at high altitude. Sounds reasonable. The only hiccup is that they didn't start dropping the dummies until 1953.
And from 53 to 47 is 6 years. That's time travel for crash test dummy, which is frankly absurd. Secondly, the crash test dummies had to be the same size and weight as pilots.
Witnesses have told us the height was 3.5 to 4 feet tall. The color was variously described as pinkish green, grayish green, slanted eyes, no nose, just 2 little nostrils, an inch slit for a mouth, 2 little orifices for ears, no hair, and the head was shaped like an inverted egg.
Our disagreement is not with our witnesses, but rather with the Air Force. They say they were wooden crash dummies 6 years removed, and our witnesses say that they were non-human beings recovered.
Besides the question of whether people saw crash test dummies or aliens, there is another issue. Why is the Air Force spending more money and time to discredit claims about alien bodies?
It's easy to say, methinks thou doth protest too much. There's no other case that they've spent anywhere near this much time, money, effort, energy, lies, etc., as on this case. I think they are fully aware that if the public buys Roswell, they've been indicted as liars, as misrepresenting the truth, as covering up, and there are some people who don't want to hear that.
One reason that people, I think, want to believe the Roswell incident is it's a conspiracy theory. Once a conspiracy theory takes off, it fuels itself, and any attempt to rebut it becomes part of the conspiracy, adding to the flames. So I think that's a big part of it. People love a yarn, and it's a sort of a attractive story.
Here comes the most believable alien.
And Roswell is the mecca of the UFO movement.
There is no question that the Air Force has been helpful in fueling conspiracy theorists' fires. But does this lead us closer to understanding what really happened? Unfortunately, no. But maybe, just maybe, that is the point.
I suspect that perhaps the conflicting stories and theories that are being put out are actually done on purpose, purely to keep us in a state of confusion.
What if all this arguing about discs, balloons, Mogul, tape, symbols, bodies and crash test dummies was very much intentional? Keep the public distracted with aliens, and the truth is easier to hide. Let's go back to the very beginning. Remember where we started. It is 2 years after World War II. The big enemy of the US was not aliens, but Nazis. maybe the people of Roswell did see a flying disc. What if it wasn't from another planet? What if it was a top-secret aircraft of Nazi design?
One of the rumours that's floated around for many, many years is the fact that the Nazis were working to try and develop flying saucer-type vehicles. Now, a lot of these rumours and stories have been just dismissed as hoaxes and friend-of-a-friend tales and legends, and rightly so in many cases. But there is this small core body of evidence to suggest that the Nazis were working to perfect circular-shaped aircraft at this particular time. FBI records talk about interviews they conducted with German prisoners of war and German fighter pilots who'd actually seen circular-shaped aircraft test flown at airfields in Nazi Germany during the Second World War.
Now, what does this have to do with Roswell? The very same scientists who may have been test flying these saucer-shaped craft were secretly brought over to America under the non-threatening codename Project Paperclip.
Project Paperclip was a project begun in the closing stages of the Second World War to bring over Nazi scientists to really help the US war efforts. Obviously, at the close of the Second World War, it became clear that the Russians were going to be the next big enemy. And with Nazi Germany defeated, the plan was to grab as many Nazi scientists as possible before the Soviets got their hands on them.
And guess where they were brought? Southeastern New Mexico. Was the crash at Roswell really a Nazi flying saucer?
Do you recognize them? They are the great inventions of the 20th century. You think you've seen them all before, but science and technology keep upgrading them. A new Discovery Science series will guide you through the most innovative laboratories where the greatest European experts work relentlessly on their development. Science inventing the future. Mega World, Monday at 9 on Discovery Science.
What if what crashed at Roswell wasn't a weather balloon, as the US military claims? Or even a UFO, as ufologists claim? What if it was a Nazi spaceship? Project Paperclip was a classified covert program that brought Nazi scientists to the New Mexican desert.
One of the chief reasons why Project Paperclip was classified and considered controversial was because quite a few of the scientists brought over weren't just German scientists who the Nazis had ordered to work for them. They actually were ardent Nazis themselves. And of course, you know, the idea of employing Nazi Germany's scientific elite at the end of the Second World War was something that, you know, many people would see as not just controversial, but a complete no-go.
What if the government has been using the idea of UFOs all along to cover up its own activities? Speaking of which, what about the little green men? Paperclip might be a plausible explanation for the disc, but what about its 4-foot-tall pilots?
What we have at Roswell was this huge field of debris that was found, and also reports of alien bodies in broadly the same location. possibly this was a V-2 rocket launch, which were taking place at the time, brought over from Nazi Germany, with a crew of monkeys on board that crashed off range, and because this was the height of the Cold War and people didn't want the Russians to find out, that a flying disc story was put in place to hide this monkey experiment, if you like. The Air Force itself has denied that particular theory, but it is a fact that in the years that followed Roswell, experiments of this nature using monkeys on board V-2 type rockets were indeed launched.
You may or may not be surprised to know that the hardcore ufologists aren't fans of this theory either.
There wasn't anything conventional there. No wire, no vacuum tubes, no rivets, no screws, no bolts, anything like that. If it was German technology, how did they use extraterrestrial components?
Let's face it, none of us, not even the ufologists, were there. Since 1947, people have searched for the truth of what happened in Roswell. But will the truth ever come out?
How could it be classified?
The whole political scene has become nothing but professional wrestling.
Just a dumb old balloon which was declassified.
In one way, it doesn't even matter if aliens landed or not. Roswell is thriving, and nothing is going to stop the believers from believing.
We have always maintained that we are merely following the facts wherever the evidence leads us.
Strange wreckage.
I'm not gonna...
We are asked oftentimes, where did they come from? Why were they here? And how could a spaceship that apparently traveled between the galaxies or between solar systems, how could it possibly crash? My easy answer to that is, I don't know, but it did.
I can't think of a more exciting subject, and what really gets me going is the response of the public. Yes, I have my critics within ufology, but if you learn something new, you have a responsibility to talk about it. That's what I'm doing, talking about it.
I think the only thing that would convince the Stanton Friedmans and the UFO true believers of the world is if the aliens came down, landed on the White House lawn, came out, and after they said Klaatu Marada Nikto, they said, guys, we didn't do Roswell.
It may well be the case that in some military archive or a vault somewhere we have the definitive proof. And if it surfaces or it doesn't surface, I still believe, an event of profound significance and controversy occurred at Roswell.
But if there is a rational explanation, we still have to deal with one big problem, and that is the testimony of the people of Roswell.
This was not a downed aircraft. This was not a weather balloon. It was not a Mogul balloon. It was not a secret device by the Nazis or the Russians or whoever. This was not one of ours. This came from someplace else.
If you believe that the Roswell legend is a load of rubbish, then you also have to believe that all those people were terribly mistaken or lying. Every single one of them. And that's very hard to do. But in the end, it's up to you.